Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Are we live, Guy? It looks like we are.
Yep.
Excellent. I'm Nick Rishwain. I'm Vice President of Experts.com, online marketing for expert witnesses and consultants, which sort of led me, uh, the perspective of the expert witness sort of led me to ask Guy DiMartino, who is our Indiana and Florida-based personal injury and probate attorney, and Allison uh, Ketchmarsky. Sorry, Allison. I thought I would have it. I thought I had it, but I will get that down. Who is a Pennsylvania-based criminal defense attorney. This whole thing started. I saw an article about the Lee Correctional Institute in South Carolina, the riot that happened there last Sunday, and I thought, well, I messaged Guy real quick. I said, Guy, we should do a live video on this. This was a major Guy does a lot of prison and jail based healthcare lawsuits, and Allison has many clients in jails and prisons and sees her clients there regularly. And so I thought, well, this would be a good topic for us to come on and talk about, is the response that seemed to be lacking in the Lee Correctional Institute jail, leading to 17, I think it was about 17 or 18 injured inmates and 7 inmates who were killed during a riot last Sunday. Did I summarize that okay, guys? Am I leaving anything out on this?
No.
So I was looking at it, of course, from as I was started saying, from a jails and prisons kind of policies and procedures point of view, and thought it'd be a good idea for a few of us with different perspectives here to join in and chime in based on our experiences. So, Allison, what are your thoughts on this? What you're visiting clients in jails, in prisons regularly. I know before we started, you said that your local county jail is always overcrowded, and what are your thoughts on the response by or prison staff at this Lee Correctional Institute?
There's so much overcrowding going on, and even I know this particular incident was talking about like a male correctional facility, but in our county correctional facility we have males and females, but it's to the point that they have to be housed at other county jails due to the overcrowding and really the short staff of correctional officers that are there to supervise and watch the inmates. And just like in this case, they talked about contraband or the making of the knife, or which they make a lot of times out of toothbrushes. I mean, it's hard for the correctional staff to have eyes on everyone at all times.
Hmm. That's right. Yeah, and that's what I seem to be reading too. It's and especially one of the experts on our site. I was reading some articles by him in preparation for this, and he says uh, the less staffing you have, or the more understaffed you are, the more likely this type of thing is to happen. And Guy, what are your thoughts on this? You see this from more of a healthcare perspective, or prisoners, inmates not getting the health care. Now, we have an instance where we have dozens of injured inmates who aren't receiving any sort of health care or first responder type of care for several hours, is what I'm understanding.
So I see this from a lot of perspectives. Uh, According to the stories, and we're not passing any judgment on anybody. We're just discussing, the issues, and I really feel for the families of the folks who died and are seriously injured, because we don't want that to happen to anybody. But there's a lot going on. When we read the articles, we see that it was sort of spurred on by contraband, and we use that word, but contraband in the prison or jail system can mean anything that's not allowed. And so the contraband pretty much in this case was cell phones, they believe that. And so when folks had cell phones, or when folks have cell phones in the prison, they're able to still have their lifeline going out to their peeps on the outside. So they're able to, if they're gang members, if they're, they're able to still conduct business. So that's the first thing that the article talked about. And what they've been trying to do or thinking about doing in South Carolina, and now because of this tragedy, they're going to do is they're going to put some cell tower jammers, so the folks won't be able to use the cell phone. So that's the first thing. Second thing that I see is the article said that in this dorm, there were about 250 to 260 inmates, and this was a maximum security prison. And usually in maximum security prisons, because of the prison classification system and because of the things that the U.S. Constitution requires, you have to have usually some type of violent type of offense. So you have, 250, 260 violent offenders, and that could be anything from somebody who committed an aggravated battery, assault, robbery, attempted murder, and even, a lot of times folks go to maximum security who deal in large quantities of drugs, even though it might not be violence. You know what I mean? So you have, a group of folks. And according to the reports, there were only 4 correctional officers in this dorm when this started. So,
I'd like to add in there, Guy, as you mentioned in our preparations, that I read a slightly different number than you, but the starting pay for these correctional officers was somewhere. I think you read something like 26,000.
Right, but it just went up to 33. Yeah.
Okay. We read the same thing then. It went up to 33. But if you've got 4 people versus 200 and some odd, I'm thinking I'm not getting paid enough to go in there and try and stop. And I'm outmanned and outgunned anyway. So I'm waiting for a response team. I'm not doing anything right now. I feel like that's a fair assessment by those 4 officers.
Right. And so what I notice when I go, and I don't want to, ballpark, things, but what I notice when I go into prisons, because of the low pay scale, and you understand it's the government and you have, government constraints, but because of the low pay scale, folks who work there sort of become dejected. They sort of become apathetic to a lot of folks, just because, they're themselves, they're barely making ends meet because of the pay scale. It's very similar to me and eerie to going into prisons, nursing homes, and public community-based hospitals. Like, for instance, in Chicago, Cook County Medical Center. It's sort of the institutional stuff that's going on. I don't know about you, Allison. I know you go into a lot of, local correctional facilities. Do you feel that vibe when you're in there?
Yes, it is. And I mean, and I know some of the guards locally here, and some of them from just being there regularly. I've spoken to them, but I know it's not a good feeling when they're in there. But the money, the pay is low, and it's hard to get those pay increases. And also, always within the system is the politics of who's getting ahead to the higher paying jobs.
Right. Yeah. So you think that we think, I think we're probably all in somewhat of agreement here that the understaffing and low pay could lead to a sort of institutional apathy that may lead to some inaction in a violent situation like this. So is that what I'm hearing?
Yes, but then so whenever you talk to anybody who's in security in a correctional facility, in my view, they always say we have 2 purposes: the safety of the inmates and the safety and protection of the workers. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? So, I don't think they're called upon, if there's a riot involving 250 folks, to have 4 people there go in harm's way. So they probably stayed in main control or one of those areas that are locked down. Maybe Allison will explain what it's like when you go into the correction facility, how they lock each door and keep you in. And apparently they had to wait hours for SWAT.
Seems to be the
They
case.
had to wait for backups and for SWAT, and you can understand that because you don't want these folks going in and potentially getting killed also. So
Correct.
Allison, why don't you for those of us who haven't been in correctional facilities, which might be Nick, unless he
I
had
was
a
in
bad
six
weekend.
today, two different ones today. So
It's been a
But
long time for me. I used to have clients in there when I worked for the county, but it's been a long time since I've had to be in a
so what's
correctional
it like,
facility.
Allison?
and I could relate to that feeling of the room, like when you're in a room and you're concerned about safety. In one of the facilities, I was there, and my investigator was not able to be there. And it was a large room, and there's no panic button. In where I practice in Luzerne County, primarily, there's a panic button in the room. So if I ever felt scared, I just hit the button on the wall and the guards would come. But I was in this other room, and my client was kind of getting angry, and I said, there's no like button for me to get out. I didn't see any of the guards. So, and I know this person is facing potentially a life sentence. And that's the other thing is like a lot of times when someone's already sentenced to life, it's like, well, who cares if I assault someone else? Like, what else are they really going to do to me? Give me more time in jail? I'm already doing life. So that's one of the difficulties. But I would say usually like in my county prison, there's always eyes watching, but it is the locked door feeling. There's no cell phones, and it's very restricted as to what you can even take inside. And they search all my paperwork. There's no paper clips, no staples, no rubber bands. It's really intense, but it's really more so too for my safety. So no one takes anything and tries to hurt me while I'm in the room with them.
So what I was actually in one of my jails today, and what I find eerie is that when you first walk into a facility, you have some type of main control. You have people there with monitors who let people in. They open the first door, but they don't open the second door until the first door is shut, and that first door closes, and you hear those automatic locks just go, whoom. You know what I mean? And you just get this feeling, and then you open the next door, and then you might go to another area, and then you have to wait, and you push main control or to the control room, and they'll do the same thing. And so the deeper you get, when you hear those doors just closing and clamping, I mean, there really is a feeling that you get that you can't go anywhere. So imagine doing that every day. And I know as human beings, we adapt, but it's still, a difficult, it's difficult. The whole thing, the whole system, is sort of hard. But what I want to talk about is some fun stuff, Allison. Since
Let's
you've
hear
had
it.
clients and I've had clients, let's talk about how these cell phones get into prison.
Yeah, because that's right. That I
How
did
do
read that it was a territorial thing, right? There was some sort of outside the walls gang thing going on that was being communicated via these cell phones. And I might add, there's quite a bit of cell phone video footage of this riot, more than you would expect, because all these contraband cell phones were in there. So, Allison,
apparently
how?
one of the younger guys who passed away actually took a selfie of himself last night and sent it out to his family.
Yes,
So
he was
obviously he had some contraband.
he was communicating with his sister, as I understand it, on the night that it happened. Then she started seeing posts on Facebook
And
of what was
Snapchat.
happening. Yeah, and Snapchat of what was happening in the prison. So everybody had pretty wide open access to this prison. So how does this kind of contraband get in? Allison, you spent a lot of time in there. You have defendants. We certainly don't want you to give away any of their secrets, but what are the things that you've experienced?
Usually cell phones are more things that would probably come in through a guard. And,
Yep.
and unfortunately, and even here in my county, there are guards that have been prosecuted, not necessarily for cell phones, but for bringing drugs into the prison. Because that's another issue of people overdosing in the prison. Like you think they're in jail. How could they be ODing on drugs? But then they are. So most of that would be through the guards, because things like drugs could be brought in through visitation and things like that. I did have a client once. I don't know if they thought he somehow got a cell phone in his body. They actually did a body scan, because they thought he was sending messages to an ex violating a PFA through a cell phone. So the state prison actually did a body scan to confirm that he did not have a cell phone contained in his person. And they dry celled him for quite a few days because the girl was adamant he was contacting her through texting.
Interesting.
So there you go. So if he was texting, he had something on his chest. He was just pushing the button.
Yeah.
On his chest. Yeah. So
and Guy, you have the same experience that it's mostly guards who are getting the cell phones in.
Well, so drugs and smaller instruments, body orifice. They swallow them. They put them up the back end. You know what I mean? And we've had a number of folks, or I've been involved with a number of folks who have had a problem with ODN because whatever they used burst, in them. Yeah. But I think it goes back to the pay, and it goes back to the whole atmosphere. So and I don't want to cast dispersion because I only see the underbelly because I get involved in stuff that's bad. Sometimes the prison guards, there's a fine line between being a prison guard and being a prisoner. And there is this underground, whenever there's supply and demand. In Prohibition, you had church people who were selling booze because there was supply and demand. You know what I mean? You had the mob who just grew in leaps and bounds because something was not allowed. So anytime there's a supply and demand thing, it's human nature. So you have folks who are not making a ton of money, right? They're going into this place. Somebody says, hey, meet my girlfriend on the way in and just bring this in for me. And you know what I mean? You're going to get paid. We'll become partners, 50-50 split, whatever it is. You know what I mean? And so the first time they do it, they feel bad. And then they sort of step into it. And then every time they do it, it's sort of like killing somebody. I haven't killed somebody, but I've spoken to a lot of people. The first time they throw up, but after a while, it just becomes, as human beings, we adapt. It just becomes second nature. And there are these rings. I know some guys who have told me, whether it's true or not, Allison, Nick, that they've had their throats slit because somebody was investigating about, cell phone contraband, and the guards were behind it. You know what I mean? So what they'll do is they'll put them in an area without cameras. They'll wrap them in a sheet. They'll get socks with locks in them, and then people will just go to town. I mean, so this sort of stuff does happen, and it has to do, it's not any different. It's human nature. So it happens outside. People are going to find a way to do it inside. So even if they try to stop the contraband, they're not going to stop it. There's going to be a will, because human beings are pretty, we're pretty good at finding out ways.
Yeah. So I would point this question, not being in it on a day-to-day basis. I'd ask the two of you, who are in it much more frequently than I am. Would you put money on, after this incident in the Lee Correctional Facility in South Carolina, would you put money on the follow-up investigations are likely to find some criminal behavior by correctional officers? Would that, and this is strictly opinion, based on your experience, do you think that that's what we were likely to find?
Allison?
I would think so. And only because of other situations or cases where I've heard individuals having a cell phone and they've alleged that it's a guard, and sometimes it going back to playing on emotions. I know there was actually like a female guard that got in trouble because she ended up in this relationship with an inmate because he gave her attention. So it was almost like this man is paying me attention. He writes me a love letter. Okay, no big deal if you want me to sneak something into the jail. So that's where sometimes that they create those, what they think are friendships. And that's where I think they are quicker to overstep the line and think, well, no one will know.
Yeah,
Interesting.
because arguably, how are cell phones getting in? I mean, they're
And what
magnetic,
appears to be a pervasive number, like an incredible number of cell phones, based on the story I was
and
just
they're
reading
really
through.
not small enough yet to swallow or to so they have to come in through deliveries, they have to come in through laundry, they have to come in through vendors, they have to come in through maybe medical staff, people who have freer access, even though they have to go through main control and they have to go through security. It's to a lesser extent as a general rule, because familiarity, every day you see the same folks working, and then you're able to do it. But so you've heard the position. The position is that in South Carolina there are like 600 or 800 prison guards short. Whether if they had 10 prison guards in there, whether they would have been able to squelch this. If there's still 250 folks fighting, who knows? You know, and then they're trying to institute something to jam the cell phones. So then the cell phones would be useless. If the cell phones are useless, then they'll go ahead. Then why bring it in? So maybe they'll do smoke signals. But whatever they're going to do, they're going to find a way to do it, because that's what we do as people. So, I had some people ask me, what do you think about liability for this, for this type of claim? Is there liability? Nick, Allison, any comments on that?
Yeah, actually, I think you and I are on the same frame of mind there. I was thinking there's probably some liability. It seems to me that something, and it could be you were informing me of some of the civil rights laws that apply to this. I was thinking of it more from a negligent supervision of the correctional officers, negligent could be some negligent hiring, especially if the certain background checks don't work out and this person had some connections to somebody in there and they were delivering contraband, etc. Uh, so that's how I was looking at it. And I would think that there would be some policies and procedures issues that could be addressed here. I mean, what you have are seven dead individuals, and usually when this type of thing happens, they need to do an investigation and analysis to find out why it happened and how we prevent it from happening again. And generally, I would expect that some form of negligence would be available as a option to those families of the deceased. Some wrongful death potentially cases will come out of this, but as you had mentioned, and as is often the case, there are some immunities that apply to the correctional officers, to the state. It was a state prison, so they have some immunities that they have to overcome in order to bring this type of a case. Allison, what are your thoughts?
I think there's definitely liability. I'm not as familiar with civil cases, but I do know that I'm sure that there will be something that'll be filed, especially too, even the families of the inmates who were killed as well. Something against the correctional facility.
Yeah, and Guy, this is really your area. This is or
Oh man, to talk about.
much more your area than it is ours. I would only deal with it from finding the appropriate expert witness for you to use in this case.
So
But
can I tell you how I would evaluate the case if one of the
please,
family members called me and they can't, from South Carolina? So there are two lines of thought. The first thing you have to do is you have to say, okay, is there a state cause of action? Okay, so state causes of action are stuff that we would know, like negligence. Do you see what I'm saying? So I just looked up, and that's why my head might have been turned. So South Carolina, like most states, have tort claim. So under common law, the king was sovereign. So the king was unable to be sued. And our common law came from England, and it happened to the states, that the states have something called sovereign immunity, like the king. And so the legislature comes up and it says, well, we'll give up some of our immunities for certain things. And those are what they in states we usually call tort claim statutes. And all states have some type of, tort claim. And so the first thing you have to decide is the state completely immune from this type of cause of action, or is a cause of action on the state claim that can be brought? And so usually negligence and wrongful death claims are waived. There's usually some procedure and some way to go ahead and bring a claim against the state. So there might be something there, but there also might be a number of qualified immunity that maybe you have to show something that the guards were more than just simply negligent, but maybe they were either showed some gross action or willful action. So that's something that the lawyers in South Carolina are going to have to deal with, that I just don't know South Carolina law. But that's the first thing I would say. Well, were there hiring and supervision practices? For instance, the guards that were there and were involved, what do their personnel files and jackets look like? They have a lot of disciplinary issues. Do they have problems with allowing inmates to beat on themselves? Do they have, those types of things? So maybe you might have a negligent retention or a negligent hiring or a negligent supervision type of claim. Do you know what I mean? And what is their duty as a guard when you're outnumbered like this to go in there and interact? You saw this whole issue with the Parkland shooting thing, right? When you had that Broward County Sheriff's officer who was there, what was his duty to go in there? There's only one lone gun person there. You know what I mean? So what's the duty? So that's on the state side. And so the other thing you have to look at when somebody is a prisoner and have already been sentenced is the U.S. Constitution. And so you would bring prisoners are usually most claims for prisoners, unless it's a First Amendment claim for retaliatory, in retaliation for filing grievances or things like that. So the other amendment that has to deal with prisoners is the Eighth Amendment. And that's the cruel and unusual punishment, because once they've been locked up, the Fourth Amendment and the 14th Amendment and all that stuff goes away. You only have the Eighth Amendment to deal with. Right? So the question is, was there deliberate indifference? So how does the Eighth Amendment apply to like the state or the prison system? That's the next thing you have to ask. Well, it applies through Section 1983, 42 USC 1983. That's how you bring it. So it's sort of like a constitutional tort. It's sort of like a constitutional negligence, but a little bit more. Okay. So the next thing you have to say, is there any cause of action you can bring against the state to get money? The answer is no. There's another amendment out there called the 11th Amendment, which says that you can't bring an action against a state agency, and the DOC is a state agency, for money damages. You can bring an action for injunctive relief, get the contraband out of there, put the jammers in, get more people working, but not for money damages. So the next thing you have to say, are there individual causes of actions that you're going to bring against the individual guards? Okay. And that would be individual deliberate indifference claims to show that they had some form of deliberate indifference. And these can follow in a whole bunch of different types or categories of cases. First type of case, deliberate indifference that we could talk about would be a failure to protect. Did they know that this was going to happen beforehand and said, the hell with it? Okay, that failure to protect claim. Improper classification. You put a non-violent offender with a violent offender. That's a violation of the Eighth Amendment. In this case, it was a maximum security prison. I think they were all violent offenders. You probably don't have a classification. You know what I mean? So I think between you and and I'm not, the world's greatest constitutional scholar, I think they are going to have problems, except for the fact that you might be able to say that it was a constitutional violation and your policies and procedures failed for failing to have enough staff. But that's a policy and procedure claim, and that might come up against the 11th Amendment immunity. You know what I'm saying? You really so this is going to be it's a terrible thing, and I hope there's a lot of folks that can learn from this, and South Carolina is going to do things differently. But I just don't know. I don't know, and we'll see. Apparently, I'm sure there's some lawyers that are already on it, and it'd be nice. It'll be not nice because it's never nice when some people get hurt or die. But it'd be interesting to see how this all works out. What I do hope is out of this tragedy that everybody learns something and things can be better.
And Guy,
Sorry about the long-winded speech. I just had
I think it's a great analysis. I'm glad you did, because it seemed like Allison and I were both learning from it. Right? I mean,
that's not my expertise of law, so it's been a long
time.
And I'm not a criminal lawyer. So.
It's been a long time since I've done anything related to either of those subjects. So, the thing with this one, which is you're hoping, Guy, as you just mentioned, Allison, you're probably hoping the same, that something is learned from this and changes are made. But there seems to be an ongoing issue in South Carolina, and has been for some time. There were a couple of other deadly prison events. As I was reading about this one, there were 12 people killed in prisons last year, 4 in one prison by 2 inmates in one instance. So the learning is not happening very quickly, or the response to it is not happening quickly. And I guess, Guy, I had one question about, and Allison, maybe you've had some experience with it as well. They're emergency response teams. Now, what we're hearing is that this went on for hours before the emergency response team had come in there. Guy, is there a failure to protect issue with that? Is the slowness of this SWAT team or this emergency response team, is that a failure to protect under the Eighth Amendment, or is that an issue that goes to the state claims, the negligence and wrongful death claims?
Well, it's not a failure to protect, but the failure to timely act, it does work in a deliberate indifference scenario. Okay. But the courts who have looked at that said, well, you have to look at the circumstances. How far was the SWAT team? How long did it take them to get there? Why couldn't they get to that dorm? All those. So it's really a factual based analysis. But remember, the constitutional claims have to be individual. Are you going to say that? Are you going to find something that it was the individual SWAT members that failed to get there in time? Do you know what I mean? That they just said, no, it's a prison. We're just going to take our time. Let's finish our pinochle game. Well, hold on. Let's finish our lunch before we go. I mean, that's the kind of facts that you would need, because they can't just be, a little slow. They have to understand and appreciate the risk, and then they have to say, forget you. So that's, it's tough. It's tough. And so that's part of the reason, you said, what makes people change? What makes institutions change? Either you have a federal court come in and say you have to change it, right, in prisons or jails. They take over and they hire some type of, master to go over there and check things, or it costs them money. Well, if in a private company, if it costs them money, they have to answer to their shareholders, right? But there's all these immunities for the state, because if I sue Pennsylvania, Allison, and And that goes to all the taxpayers. So nobody really has to pay it. Do you know what I'm saying? So those are the only two, how do you prescribe change? Right?
Yeah. What would we like to see? Allison, you have so many clients who are in this situation, who could potentially be in a terrible situation like
Mhm.
this, which you wouldn't want to see happen. What would you hope to see as come about for inmates in South Carolina or even in Pennsylvania, wherever? What kind of changes would you like to see here? I think that's a fair question.
I think a lot of times, one, it's obviously the more staffing. Two, sometimes with the staffing, as well as it's trying to, the guards not poking or irritating inmates sometimes too, because everybody's a person that's in the jail regardless, and we're all humans and we all should have some level of respect. So, I think sometimes that's part of the culture that stirs up riots of this nature as well. So, um, I think it's really though the supervision. I think like you said, even about classifications, making sure that the right inmates are in with the other ones and stuff. And um, I know a lot of it happens too when they put them in like the hole, they call it, like solitary confinement. Um, when I've heard the lengths of time people have been in solitary, I barely probably could make a whole day in solitary, but when I've heard people have been in there for years, I mean that like causes some of the internal problems that lead to the riots that happen. So I think sometimes it needs to be a little better treatment of some of the inmates as well.
And Guy, how about you? What would you like to see come out of this?
I don't want to be a naysayer, but you're talking about a governmental institution and it's hard to change and it's hard to move. I guess what I would like to see is that they have some constraints in there and they try to make it safer. I guess the biggest thing that you could have done to prevent this, and I don't know that it was preventable, was to actually give sensitivity training to the guards to be able to determine that there's something brewing under the surface that it's about to trigger. There had to be some warnings. There had to be some tinder. You know what I mean? There had to be some
Mhm.
tinder. And whether they put water on it or whether they threw gasoline on it. Do you know what I mean? Or whether they
Yep.
just didn't give a hoot
Right.
about, what was happening. And so,
Yeah.
one thing that I thought was strange is I read the same article that you did. Oh no, and then I transferred over to another newspaper. And so, they list the names of the seven dead. And the way that I read the article was that, they were real, and I understand the news is the news, but they were just the article was all about this person was 33 years old. This person committed this atrocity, had a 31 or 32 or 35-year sentence in order like, okay, big deal. I mean, and that there are people out there that are saying, oh, seven people died. It cost us $120,000 a year each to house them and to feed them and this, that, and the other thing. They were going to be there for 30 years. They do the math. Well, this is a good thing. They killed themselves. Hey, they killed themselves. It saves us millions of dollars. But, that's sort of scary now when you see all the true crime information out there with all these people who are being exonerated by
Mhm.
DNA and all that
Mhm.
stuff. What if one of those people were part of that seven?
Yep.
You know what I
Scary.
mean? So that's what I want folks to think about.
Yep.
And I'm not a bleeding heart type of
That's
guy.
such a good point. Like I like to hear that point. I mean, it's always so hard in criminal defense sometimes when someone says I didn't do it, and then if you roll the dice, you go to trial. Like you can never 100% say what can happen, but there have been so many cases. And I heard a man speak who was one of the first exonerees based on DNA evidence. So it is true, and all your points as to how people feel about good, there's less money, but I mean, they are people. That's where the thing is. In the end, like everybody's a person, and I have people who are, I'm sure, in max prisons, and they're really, while they've committed a bad crime, as a person to me, I mean, that's why I said it. It's sometimes people are too quick to judge everyone.
I agree. I mean, the people that I represent who are in prisons, they've made mistakes, but they're all respectful. They all follow through. I mean, every time that I've gone into a prison, you know what I mean? They all, I mean, things seem to be okay. Sometimes I have to wear, a body alarm, but I mean, but I, I, I
You know,
listen, but for the grace of God, I could have been there with the
that's right.
stuff that I did as a kid. You know
Right.
what I mean? Being stupid. I remember the times. But for the
Yeah.
grace
And
of God, I wouldn't be a lawyer. I would be sitting there. If something would have changed 10 seconds one way or another. You
And
know what I mean?
Allison, and I
So,
think Allison can tell us. For Allison, my friends who do criminal defense have told me multiple times. AJ Richmond was watching with us. I don't know if he's still here, but they've told me multiple times that so many of their clients, and I forget what the percentage, maybe 75% of their clients made an innocent, they made a mistake, not an innocent mistake, but they're not the repeat offenders. Like it's a huge proportion, a huge number of their clients who they've represented on some criminal matter were fairly normal people who made a mistake.
it's the
Well,
jail and prisons that make them repeat offenders. They all get PTSD. They all come out suffering from mental illness, and that's what they end up driving them back. I see it all. I sit in depositions, and when it's a civil deposition, these guys or girls on the defense side, they will take these depositions for hours, and I could track these folks' lives, and I could find the point where their life changed. You just see it. And so I understand it. There's a lot of people who don't understand it, but I understand it. I say it every night, but for the grace of God, I could have been there. And not that I was a bad kid, but I was
Right.
stupid. I
Right.
did stupid things.
Stupid stuff. Yep. I think a lot of us did. And I'll add one point here that I'm reading out from a prison expert who says this, that goes to that staffing issue that we've talked about. Having fewer staff members means fewer officers walking around talking with the inmates, and sometimes inmates will tell officers about impending violence. Fewer staff means fewer patrols in the cell blocks and yard. With fewer staff, the tension in the block yard and yard will not be felt. Important clues to danger will be missed. And also, with fewer staff, there's generally a lot more hours that they're spent in the cell just boiling over, I'm not getting out of the cell. This seems to be, this made sense to me when I read it. So I
Easier
thought
to
that
lock
was,
down people. Yep.
yeah, easier to lock them down when you don't have the staff.
Yep.
But that's when they're boiling over. So I thought
they
that
love to
was
come out of the
interesting.
cell. Like people wish I would visit every day so they would come out of the cell.
You become their
Right.
pen pal.
But I mean that's the thing that they do, and some people in there would be honest and share things. I think it's if you get that comfort level too. It's even like with myself, like I prefer to go sometimes on a specific shift where I know some of the guards. One, two, I feel safer that they are watching, so I know like they're watching the room. So if there's an issue, they're going to be there quickly. But that comfort level of being able to share is so important.
Yes.
So
Very
Allison,
interesting.
as a general rule, when you go in, it's a lot different to have a 50-year-old guy go in than a pretty female. Everybody's pretty respectful, right? I mean, I'm sure you probably have one or two jerks, but do you feel because you're a woman that the inmates are less respectful to you, or they do the cat holler in, or what?
Uh, no, I think they expect usually when I go to the prison I wear sweats and different things, and I said it's not like we're here on a date. We're here to talk about your case. But I'm I'm pretty tough, and I kind of tell it like it is to them. So I rarely have difficulties, and like I said, I mean, right now I have like two homicide defendants and maybe like another two attempted murder people. Like I have no issues meeting with them. They're respectful to me. So I'm fortunate, but I'm a lot tougher, and I'm not as swayed by what they think is going to be like.
I'm sure some of that was a learning experience too, right, Allison? I'm sure there were mistakes made in your early practice that you learned how to adjust to.
Well, yes, they're always trying to take advantage of you in the beginning, and that's what you have to learn. And that's where, like, even relating back to the guards, like somebody who's a new guard or things like they try to manipulate you or get you to do things, or oh, could you bring me this or do this for me? So it takes time, and when you're new, you're maybe not so sure of the law and what your attorney responsibilities are supposed to be, and how and you're just nervous. Now I'm probably the meaner lawyer at the jail. But
Well, guys, I think we've wrapped. We've
Yep.
covered this topic pretty thoroughly. Any final thoughts before we close out for the evening?
It was great spending time with you, Nick and Allison. I'm
Yeah.
sorry about getting on my soapbox.
No, no, it was
oh,
good. It was Yeah, I was learning a lot. I was learning a lot. It's one of those I wish I messaged you on I think it was Monday, and I think you were traveling or something, Guy, or and I was like, "Hey, are you going to jump on this?" And I was thinking, and then it hit me again yesterday. I didn't hear back from you, and I thought I better follow up with him
Glad you mentioned.
because it is a big issue. We have tons of people in prisons, and we need to be cognizant of the conditions in those prisons.
Some point in
So.
time, we probably have to come back on and talk about the whole drug issue and these people who are ODing by stuff that they shouldn't be having. I mean,
That's
K2 is the big thing now in the prisons. They can't find it in blood and urine, but that'll be another day.
that's another day. With that, I'm Nick Rishwain, and thank you to Guy DiMartino and Allison Ketchmarski. Did I get it right? All
you
right.
did. That's why I usually just go by my first name because it's always. But very good.
All right.
Yep. Nick's
Excellent.
in
Thank you,
California,
guys.
Alice is in PA, and I'm outside Chicago today.
Outside Chicago today, but where will you be tomorrow? Will you be in Florida
Nope,
tomorrow or Indiana?
I will be here until May.
Okay. All right. So we hope to see everybody who catches this replay